What if everything you've been taught about women is wrong? Most men will live their entire lives never understanding what women actually want. They'll buy the flowers, they'll send the long texts, they'll do everything society told them to do, and they'll still end up confused, broken, and alone. But 500 years ago, a man sat in exile, stripped of everything, and wrote down truths so dangerous that governments tried to burn his words. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli, and what he discovered about human nature, especially female nature, wasn't pretty, it wasn't romantic. But it was real. Today, we're going to crack open that brutal, uncomfortable truth that most people are too afraid to say out loud. The one thing women really want. The one thing they won't tell you. If you're not ready to have your entire worldview challenged, leave now. But if you want to finally understand the game you've been losing your whole life, stay. Because after this, you will never see women or yourself the same way again. Before we go deeper, drop a comment, the truth. Let me know you're here for the real answers. Let me read you Machiavelli's exact words, written in exile after being tortured and stripped of everything he'd worked for. Men are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, covetous, and as long as you succeed, they are yours entirely. They will offer you their blood, property, life, and children when the need is far distant. But when it approaches, they turn against you. Let those words sink in, feel how they land. Notice the resistance that comes up, the voice saying, "That's too cynical, that's not true of everyone." That resistance is exactly what Machiavelli predicted. He wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." Humans are extraordinarily skilled at maintaining public performances of loyalty and virtue while operating privately from pure self-interest. But here's what makes this observation brutal rather than just cynical. Machiavelli included himself in this assessment. He wasn't saying other people are selfish while he was noble. He was saying all humans, himself included, operate primarily from self-interest. And here's what most men never understand. Women are no exception to this rule. They're not mysterious creatures operating on some different logic. They're human. And human nature follows patterns that have existed for thousands of years. The question is, are you going to keep pretending those patterns don't exist, or are you going to learn to see them? Here's the first thing Machiavelli noticed about power. The men who commanded armies, who built empires, who held the loyalty of thousands, they all had one thing in common: not money, not looks, not even intelligence. They had something that pulled people toward them like gravity. Something that made others want to be part of their world. Something that no amount of flowers or long texts could ever replace. Machiavelli called it virtue. The Romans called it gravitas. But whatever you call it, it comes from one source. A man who has something that matters more to him than any single person. Consider this for a moment. Have you ever met someone who was so focused on their purpose, so driven by their mission, that just being around them made you feel something? That's not an accident. That's psychology. Now here's where most men go wrong. They think that by focusing on her, by making her the center of their universe, they'll win her heart. But what actually happens is the opposite. The more you focus on her, the less she feels your gravity. Because gravity doesn't come from clinging, it comes from mass, from substance, from being someone who has weight in the world. Machiavelli observed that rulers who became dependent on allies rather than their own strength always met their downfall. The same applies here. A man who becomes emotionally dependent on a woman has handed over his power. And once you hand over your power, you never get it back gracefully. So what is the one thing women actually want? They want a man with a mission. That's it. That's the one thing. A man who has something in his life that matters more than her. Not because she wants to be neglected, not because she wants to feel unimportant, but because a man with a mission is a man with direction. He has gravity. And purpose is the single most attractive quality a human being can possess. When you make her your mission, you've already lost. Because no woman wants to be someone's entire reason for living. It's suffocating, it's unattractive, and it guarantees that eventually she'll leave. Here's the first thing Machiavelli would tell you if he were alive today. Being nice is not a strategy, it's a surrender. Machiavelli wrote, "It is much safer to be feared than loved if one must choose between the two." Most people read that and think he was talking about tyranny. He wasn't. He was talking about respect. Here's what most men get wrong. When you're nice because you're afraid of conflict, afraid of rejection, afraid of being abandoned, that's not kindness. That's weakness wearing a mask. Look at the men in your life who get walked on. The ones who bend over backwards, who sacrifice everything, who make their entire personality about pleasing others. What happens to them? They get taken for granted, not because people are evil, Because nature tests boundaries, and when boundaries don't exist, respect evaporates. A woman doesn't sit down and think, he's too nice, I'm going to disrespect him now. It happens on a level much deeper than logic. When a man has no backbone, something inside her brain registers him as unsafe. Not physically unsafe, evolutionarily unsafe. Because for thousands of years, a man who couldn't hold his ground was a man who couldn't protect his family. So what do? You become the kind of man who can be kind from a position of strength. You choose kindness, not because you're afraid of what happens if you're not, but because you want to be. There's a world of difference between these two things, and women can sense the difference in seconds. The dangerous man isn't attractive because he's dangerous. He's attractive because he's decisive. He doesn't ask for permission to live his life. He doesn't wait for a woman to tell him what to do. He moves with certainty. Women don't want danger. They want a man who isn't afraid of it. Now, here's a question that might make you uncomfortable. How many people in your life would stay if you had nothing to offer them? Machiavelli observed that every human relationship operates on exchange. He wrote, "Men never do good unless necessity drives them to it." Consider your closest relationships right now. The people you're most certain love you unconditionally. Now picture this. You lose everything. Your money, your status, your health, your ability to give anything. How many people stay? Be honest with yourself. That number, that small, uncomfortable number, is the truth about human loyalty. Everyone else is there for what you provide, not who you are. This sounds harsh, but look at your own life. The friend who vanished when you stopped being fun. The partner who lost interest when you stopped meeting their needs. The family member who only calls when they need something. These aren't exceptions, they're the norm. Machiavelli would look at each of these scenarios and say, of course, what did you expect? It was about what you provided. So, what do? You stop pretending relationships are based on pure love. You start building relationships on mutual benefit. You give, but you also require. You invest in people who invest in you, and you stop pouring energy into people who only take. But here's a warning. If you keep giving to people who only take, you're not being generous, you're being used. And the moment you have nothing left to give, they'll disappear. That's not loyalty, that's exploitation. Machiavelli would tell you that the wise prince maintains alliances that benefit both parties. The foolish prince sacrifices himself for others and wonders why he's alone. What if I told you that the reason you're losing is because you're revealing too much too soon? Machiavelli warned leaders never to reveal their full hand. He wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are." Human beings are wired to value what they have to work for. When you reveal everything about yourself immediately, you remove the discovery process. You take away the mystery that keeps someone thinking about you. Consider the early stages of attraction. You don't know everything about the other person. You're curious. You're intrigued. You want to know more. That curiosity is what fuels desire. But most men, when they like a woman, dump everything on the table immediately. Their feelings, their insecurities, their entire history, their plans for the future. They think vulnerability equals connection. And in some cases, deep into a relationship, it does. But in the early stages, revealing everything is suicide. Here's why. When you tell a woman everything about yourself in the first week, you've removed the discovery process. You've taken away the mystery that keeps her thinking about you at 2 in the morning. You've essentially handed her the entire book and said, "Here, no need to read it." And what does she do with that book? She puts it on the shelf and forgets about it. Not because it wasn't good, but because there's no reason to pick it up again. She already knows the ending. You reveal yourself in layers. You give enough to create interest, but you always leave them wanting more. You share your depth gradually, so that every conversation feels like peeling back another layer of something fascinating. This isn't about playing games. It's about being genuinely interesting. If you have depth, you don't need to dump it all at once. You let it unfold naturally. Machiavelli understood that people are drawn to what they can't fully understand. The leaders who maintained an air of unpredictability were the ones who held power longest. Because when people can't predict you, they pay attention to you. Now we have to address something uncomfortable. Women test men. They do. It's not manipulation. It's not cruelty. It's biology. Machiavelli observed that fortune favors the bold. He wrote, "Fortune is a woman, and to keep her under control, it is necessary to treat her roughly." This quote has been misunderstood for centuries. He wasn't advocating cruelty. He was making a point about decisiveness versus passivity. On a subconscious level, a woman needs to know that the man she's with can handle pressure. Because if he can't handle her emotions, how is he going to handle the world? If he falls apart over a disagreement, what happens when real adversity hits? These tests come in different forms. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's an argument over something small. Sometimes it's flirtation with someone else to see if you'll react. And here's the key. The test isn't about the content, it's about the response. If you react with panic, jealousy, or desperation, you fail. Not because your emotions are wrong, but because your reaction reveals a lack of internal stability. So what do? You stay calm, you stay steady, you don't crumble, you don't beg, you don't chase, you simply remain who you are, unshaken by the storm around you. Consider the men who are most attractive to women. They're not the ones who panic. They're the ones who remain calm when everything else is chaotic. That calmness signals strength. It signals that they can handle whatever comes. If you react emotionally to every test, you're telling her that you're easy to manipulate. You're predictable, and predictable men are boring men. Machiavelli would tell you that the man who cannot be provoked cannot be controlled, and the man who cannot be controlled is the man who commands respect. This might be the most important chapter you'll ever hear about relationships, and most men will refuse to believe it. The ability to walk away is the ultimate power in any relationship, and most men simply do not have it. Machiavelli argued that a prince must never be so attached to an alliance that he cannot sever it when it no longer serves his interests. He wasn't talking about being disloyal, he was talking about self-preservation. The moment you cannot walk away from something, you have become its prisoner. When you cannot walk away, you tolerate disrespect, you tolerate dishonesty, you tolerate being treated as an option while treating her as a priority, and every time you stay despite being mistreated, your value drops. Not because she's cruel, because your inability to leave tells her that you have no other options, that you're desperate, and desperation is the least attractive quality a human being can possess. So what do? You build a life so fulfilling, so rich with purpose and meaning, that no single person's absence could destroy it. You reach a point where walking away isn't a tactic, it's a natural consequence of knowing your own worth. Here's the paradox. The man who is willing to lose the relationship is usually the one who keeps it, because his willingness to walk shows that his love is a choice, not a dependency. And chosen love is infinitely more valuable than desperate love. If you're not willing to walk away, you'll accept any treatment. And the moment you accept disrespect, you've taught her that disrespecting you has no cost. Machiavelli would tell you that fear is maintained by a dread of punishment, which never fails. In relationships, that means boundaries without consequences are meaningless. If you say you'll leave but never do, you've taught her that your words mean nothing. We've covered a lot, but there's one final truth. Machiavelli spent his life studying power, and the greatest power he ever identified wasn't military force or political cunning, it was self-mastery. Here's what that means. The only thing women truly want is a man who has conquered himself. Not conquered the world, not conquered other men, himself, a man who has faced his own weakness and refused to be defined by it, a man who has looked at his fears and walked through them. A man who has discipline over his emotions, not because he suppresses them, but because he has processed them. Consider every leader Machiavelli studied. The ones who failed because of internal weakness, arrogance, insecurity, paranoia, dependency on others' approval. The ones who succeeded had mastered themselves before they attempted to master their world. You can learn every technique, every strategy, and every psychological trick in the book. But if you haven't done the work on yourself, it's all hollow. Women see through tactics, they always have. What they can't see through is genuine transformation. So what do? You do the work. You build yourself. You push through discomfort. You develop your mind, your body, your skills, and your emotional intelligence. You become the kind of man who doesn't need to chase anyone because you've become someone worth finding. Machiavelli would tell you that the world rewards those who prepare in times of peace, so they're ready for times of war. In your life, that means working on yourself before you need to, not when you're heartbroken, not when you've been rejected, now. So after everything we've covered, here's the truth that changes everything. What do women want? They want what every human being wants: strength they can trust, the depth they can explore, a purpose they can believe in, a presence that makes them feel safe without making them feel smothered. But more than that, they want a man who has conquered himself, a man who doesn't need them, but chooses them, a man whose love is a gift, not a dependency. Machiavelli spent his life decoding power, and the greatest power he ever identified was self-mastery. The man who controls himself controls his world, and the man who controls his world naturally attracts those who want to be part of it. Stop chasing, start building, stop performing, start becoming, stop asking what women want, and start asking what kind of man you want to be. Because when you answer that second question honestly, and then do the work to become that man, the first question answers itself. If this changed how you see yourself, drop a comment. I see clearly now. Subscribe to Machiavelli for more dark psychology, power dynamics, and the art of becoming undeniable. The only person standing between you and the life you want is the version of you that's too comfortable to change.